Hello and welcome to Pressure Point. Our topic this program, treaty negotiations in BC. I'm your host, Valerie Dudoward. I'd like to welcome our guests for the program, Ed John, Grand Chief, First Nations Summit. Welcome to the program, Ed.
Thank you.
And also Joe Becker, Chief, Musqueam First Nation. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Valerie.
This is a huge topic, and we are three people sitting in a place of more information, I think, than a lot of others. Well, maybe I should exclude myself from this. I seek more information. The two of you certainly have privy to a lot of information. Recently, an agreement in principle was signed with the Niska Nation, and all eyes are upon this, the eyes of the public, the eyes of First Nations people, the eyes of Aboriginal people, the eyes of the voters. I'd like to ask you, Ed, first, is this a blueprint, as I've heard sometimes referred to in the media? Is this agreement signed with the Niska or Nishka something that is going to be used as a standard kind of blueprint?
It's an agreement in principle. I think the best way to answer that is, in the words of the Niska themselves, is that that agreement is for the Niska themselves. It's their agreement. It's an agreement in principle, as I said. It's signed off. They have 2 years now to finalize a treaty. This agreement in principle has no legal status as such. But given the diversity of First Nations in this province, we have, first of all, we have 200 Indian bands. We have in a neighborhood of about 30 different tribal councils, and we have 8 distinct language groups in this province, so that the language that the Musqueam people speak, I have no idea what their language is. I don't understand their language. Or to the west of where I am, the Giksan, they speak, or Tsimshian, yeah. It's a completely different language. The language that you speak, and if we were able to talk, we wouldn't understand each other if we spoke to each other in our language. So there is tremendous diversity in this province in terms of the First Nations, so that to think that one agreement will be a model or a blueprint for all of the other tribes, I think is not the appropriate way to look at it. I think what needs to be taken into account is the various interests. The coastal people, the coastal communities are going to have different interests than we in the interior.
And you are from?
I'm from the Lasdan Nation, which is 150 miles west and north of Prince George. It's a point of reference.
So, speaking of diversity, we have Joe Becker, who's from Musqueam. As a nation that is very different in the sense, I think, from some other nations, such as the Niska, who are geographically located far from the centers of provincial government or, you know, the major municipalities, say of Vancouver, Prince George, Victoria, as Ed John is, where you are from is located right in the heart of everything that's happening geographically. What is the take of the Musqueam Nation on the agreement in principle?
Well, we're no different than Ed John in the view that the AIP is a Niska agreement, and they negotiated that in good faith with the 2 levels of government. Being a Niska agreement, it's applicable to the negotiations that they wanted. Musqueam, being in an urban setting, practically in the heart of Vancouver, the type of negotiations that we hope to carry out with both BC and Canada will be completely different.
What might be different? What might look different for you, for example?
Well, we certainly aren't going to get the land area that the Niskas negotiated.
You mean in terms of the overall
That's right.
square miles?
There just isn't that kind of land on the Lower Mainland. The fisheries component may be something similar to that, but we believe it'll be somewhat different. The issue of taxation, jurisdiction, those will be different, and we only hope that through proper consultations with other neighboring First Nations that we'll learn from one another that there is a form of continuity that should be taken, but the agreements themselves and the negotiations themselves will be different.
What is it that you are working toward, or on behalf of, if you can speak in that way, the nation that you are from, Musqueam? What would Musqueam like to see, and where is Musqueam in the process of negotiation now?
Musqueam is in what they call Phase 3. We're hoping to sign up our framework document. However, the Musqueam view and the Musqueam requirement, when you look at the treaty process, though it's not clarified through government policy or by both Canada and BC, what they were willing to consider, there was a foregone conclusion from the province that they're looking at a 5% solution, which we totally don't agree with. And
what does that mean, 5%?
Well, they're talking about a land mass of 5%. And if you look at the Lower Mainland, there isn't a 5% solution. So what is the saw-off in that? Is it a compensation package? Are there other resources that we could be looking at? So it takes a different tone than the negotiations that happened in the Niskas.
Mm. Well, on the other hand, you know, we're the nearest town from where I come, where I live, the nearest town, the non-native community, is 40 miles away.
And what is that one?
And that's the town of Fort St. James. And between us and the town is another one of our villages and a lot of forest. And that gives, it's something that we will definitely look at. Our people have said, and we're in a very much a different position than the Musqueam people are, because we have access to our territory in a completely different way than say the Musqueam people would.
Is that because of the access, or the...
Yeah, it's just because we're 40 miles from the nearest town and 150 miles from the next, the major urban center, Prince George, if you can call it that. I hope that they don't get too mad at me because I said if you can call it that, but as opposed to a fishery component being an important part of the compensation or the important part of the negotiations, ours, on the other hand, would be the timber industry, the timber resource. Our tribal territory accounts for about 33 to 35% of the province's stumpage and royalty payments collected every year. $461 million collected in stumpage from our tribal territory every year.
And how much of that does the nation see?
I don't know. It's not. If anything, we've been trying to get the province to upgrade the road into our community from the nearby town, and it's an uphill battle. Even though every day we see countless numbers of logging trucks taking out hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of timber over that road, they're reluctant to put anything into that road right now. I mean, that's the kind of thing we'd like to see, but we're not seeing it.
I guess for myself, as a First Nations person living very far, 1,000 miles by road and 500 as the crow flies from my home territory in the north, in the northwest. Even I, who attempt to find out and to research and to understand what is happening in terms of negotiations, I find it very, very difficult. And I think that probably the average Joe and Jill public find it very difficult as well. Are there access points right now for the average person to tap into information about the process?
Well, there is, within any given territory or provincially, there are a number of committees or advisory groups that are structured under the treaty process. They have, but generally, they're interest groups that either are interested in advancing the process or in gearing the process down or slowing it down. There is no process for the public itself except through public forums. Now, there are a number of public forums that have been held, but I don't honestly think that there's been enough of them. Now, part of the reason for that may be that people view the stages that we're into right now, like I'll use Musqueam as an example, is that we're not in negotiations yet. We're coming to terms with what will be the agenda items. And that's still working with Canada and BC to get to a stage of where you will have an agenda for negotiations. And these are still confidential. Until you sign off on your framework and have your substantive issues, then there is what they call an openness protocol that the province allows the BC municipalities, their representatives, to come to the table and as advisors. And they're not negotiating on behalf of the municipalities. They're there just to be observers and to report back to their constituents. So the process to date isn't that we are negotiating behind closed doors, because there are no negotiations happening yet. But when they do start, that's when I feel that there has to be more public involvement by us as First Nations, having a responsibility to inform our constituents on the Lower Mainland what is in the process, what to alleviate, at least alleviate the fears that some of them have that their property is going to be involved in the treaty negotiations. And that's not so, but it's a fear that someone is spreading, that be careful, these negotiations are going to give away 110% of BC. And so the public, in our view, has to become more involved and more informed as to what's going on in the process.
I'd like to talk about that a bit more, and I guess along that line, something that interests me in terms of you, Ed, is that you have a background that touches upon law very strongly, and I'm wondering...
Don't hold that against me.
What's that?
Don't hold it against me.
I don't hold it against you. And I'm wondering what it is that brought you to the point of the involvement that you have, and that I know that you've had for at least the last 15 or 20 years that I know about.
Yeah. Well, quickly before we leave the point that Joe was talking about, programs like yours are informative, are useful to provide information in the Lower Mainland area. So I think your show has to be commended for doing this. In our area, what we do, we have our negotiations open. Even the framework negotiations, we're negotiating what we call a framework agreement. It's a glorified term for an agenda. All it does, it sets up a time, a process, and a listing of issues that should be negotiated. It's nothing more than that. And that's what we've done. We've invited the public. We allow them to come to observe what's going on. We have nothing to hide from anyone in our area. And there we have a sign-off and openness protocol with them. And the public, if they're willing and want to travel to our communities and listen in, they're more than welcome. But my involvement, yeah, you're right. It did start a long time ago, and I graduated from law school here, UBC, some years back in '79. Went into private practice for a number of years, and decided I wasn't really wanted to continue with the rest of my life being a criminal lawyer, which is what I did a lot of. I decided that I want to use my education for a different purpose, which I felt would be more beneficial overall to my own people in my area, my communities, and to see if I could use those skills that I obtained during the years of working as a lawyer, and to use those in this process, and which is what I've been doing. I understand the history quite well. I understand the legal history very well when it comes to these issues. And in fact, I teach a course at the University of Victoria, the School of Public Administration, on law and Aboriginal governments. And in fact, in that course, I learn a lot more from my students than perhaps they learn from me. It's a very interesting program. So I use those skills in a number of different ways. I use the negotiations that you learn as a lawyer, the discipline that's required, the preparedness that's required in the work that I'm doing now with the First Nations Summit.
I'm curious about Joe's involvement as well, and I think especially because in the Lower Mainland, Musqueam is very high profile. And I see Joe Becker's name associated sometimes with some of the issues revolving around the commercial fishery, the commercial, mainly salmon fishery. How did you get to the point that you're at now, in 20 words or less?
Personally? I've been involved in Musqueam's politics for a number of years, probably around 30 years. And I have a special place in my heart for our community, and believe in order to bring some of those issues that we've been involved with, or that I've been involved with personally, there is a need for some sacrifice, and that is generally what us political people do, is sacrifice a lot of our own personal time and quality time for our families in order that you advance the positions of your particular First Nation. So fisheries to me has always been near and dear to my heart, and I've been working at fisheries probably 20 years. And the issues today are so complex that it's not just a simple question of just going and throwing your net out and catching a few fish and taking them home. The fishery today, as people are starting to read in the press, is very complicated. Runs are down or runs are up. Sparrow has given a new direction, or opened the door a crack for us to get our foot in the door. And
that was a major decision.
Yes.
Decision that you're referring to.
Yes, and it is as I say, open the door a crack for us to get our foot in the door, and it's up to ourselves and the willingness of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to enter into co-management agreements, or what I would call true co-management, not cooperative management.
I guess the one common thread that I hear from both you and Ed, you know, in our few minutes of discussion here, is that while the specifics might be different, where yours might be focused on the fishery, specifically like the fin fishery and specifically salmon, and yours might be more focused on the logging industry, that it really has to do with the activities that relate to economic development and natural resources within your territories. Is that a common thread?
That's partly, partly true, because we need to have opportunities for job opportunities for our people. Our people need to work. Our people need to feed their families. So it is a very important component for for all of us. I think all of our people in British Columbia. But I think development, whether it's harvesting fish or harvesting timber, has to be done in a sensible way. And I think there's, as we're getting to realize in this province very quickly, and we'll see it this summer with the salmon fishery, with the virtually next to no stocks. I mean, 1.5 million expected in a Fraser River system was unthinkable years back, but it's going to have a devastating effect on the fisheries. And you know what will happen there, as it usually happens, somebody will take the brunt, and usually the scapegoat turns out to be our people. In the forest industry, our people are still on the margins of the industry. We're, in terms of where I come from at least, we're very much on the outside looking into the industry, even though it's a major industry in my part of the world, my part of the province. Our people are still on the edges of the industry. We're slowly getting involved in aspects of management, in silviculture, in logging, and slowly our people are being involved in a bigger and bigger way. The nearby community, for example, one of the mills has 70 employees. They have one native person working there. Another one of the bigger mill, there's 345 workers there. About, I think, the last count, we had 5 native people working in that mill. So we're still on the outside, even though our population makes up about half of the population of the entire area.
So other than, you know, clearly the need, the desire, historically and currently, to participate, to be a leader economically and in socioeconomic development within your home territories, and the same within mine. If you were to wake up tomorrow and be able to find something significantly different as a result of treaty negotiations that's doable, say, within a 1-year period, what would that look like to you?
Well, to me, I guess it would be that we would have the opportunity to become self-sustaining and not be confined to the restricted area that we are at Musqueam, because we've only have, our total reserve is 416 acres, and we have 1,000 people.
For those of us like me who've lived in the city for a long time, how many, say, city blocks might that look like? 416 acres?
Well, for a person that lived in the city all his life, I couldn't tell you how many city blocks that is. But realistically, it's very, very small. Economically, we're not in a position that we can self-sustain ourselves as yet, and that's what this is all about, is to negotiate what all of our rights are and what they really mean to us, and to become self-sufficient in not only looking after our own people, but governing our own people. I think that's what I would like to, if I could wake up tomorrow and the magic wand was waved, that's what I would love to have, is that we are not totally dependent on government social programming.
I like to borrow that wand, like to build on it. I think that attitude and perceptions about our people are very big, very important.
Do you think that part of that might come from us too? The way that we, I mean, as First Nations people, look at the world and look at ourselves?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
We're already there?
No, I don't think so. I think our people are very hardworking. Our people are very industrious. Our people are very thoughtful. Our people have visions for the future, and that our thinking is as valuable as anyone else's thinking. And I think that
so you're talking about the perception of others.
The Western democratic thought about their superior attitudes of conquering the universe, conquering the world.
Manifest destiny.
Yeah, try to conquer life. You can't, because we're all going to die sometime. So it's best we don't think like that. It's best to think in a way that we can live in harmony with everything that's around us as best as we can. And part of that growth is understanding our own role, our own place in this world, our own place in this universe. And what we have in our communities, I'm sure, and I know a lot about the Tsimshian communities and their thought and their stories, is that some of the teachings that we have are fundamentally important to the way we think. And if people were able to understand some of the underpinnings, some of the philosophical underpinnings, although some people might think we don't have a history and some people might think we don't have a culture or any philosophy, there is very deep knowledge in our communities. And that's what we take as best as we can and try to apply them to our lives.
If the average person, had been listening to the program as we come to the end of our program on Pressure Point this time, the average person might be asking herself or himself, how can I get more information? What can you think of that people can do, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal?
From a province-wide perspective, we have what we call the First Nations Summit. It's a province umbrella provincial group that we have, and we do have an office in North Vancouver that we do have information that we can provide to people. They can, a number that we have is 990-9939, and that's the Summit office.
990-9939.
And we try to provide information and responses to questions that people bring up with us. We don't have, we're not as geared up as the federal or provincial governments might be, but we try to provide information as best as we can.
And this is something that I know is very important to you, Joe, is that if people, and I think people do want to know, I think people are seeking information, that's one option, and might there be other outside of the Aboriginal community they might think of?
Well, the public forum process is one of the ways of doing it, and it's a contribution of information by the two levels of government, the First Nations Summit and the Aboriginal community involved in those negotiations. That is another vehicle. The First Nation involved in the negotiations, wherever that forum is being held, if it's in a person's, like in Musqueam's traditional territory, we will also bring information that's pertinent to our negotiations. And the other, I guess, is that the constituents in various ridings, their MLA and their member of parliament,
yes,
also have a responsibility to inform those constituents as to what's going on in this process.
Contact those members.
Contact those members and ensure that they are providing them with the appropriate and proper information.
Joe Becker, Ed John, my guests on this program of Pressure Point, thank you very much. My name is Valerie Dudoward. I've been your host on Pressure Point, Treaty Negotiations in British Columbia. Thank you for joining us.
The preceding program was produced through the facilities of Rogers Community 4, Vancouver. We want to hear from you and invite you to leave your comments and suggestions on our 24-hour response line message machine. Please call 731-5812.